Welcome to Siliconsciousness, the DSR Network podcast focusing on the artificial intelligence revolution, politics, and policy.
This podcast is underwritten in part by the U.S. Embassy of the United Arab Emirates. Its editorial content is completely independent, and the views expressed are exclusively those of participating experts. It is presented live, without editing. For further information about the UAE's efforts in the areas of artificial intelligence and technology, go to the website of the embassy at www.uae-embassy.org and search for UAE-US Tech Cooperation. We thank them for their support. We thank everybody who's supporting this podcast for their support, and we look forward to it developing and growing over time because the issue is so important. Hello and welcome to DSR Siliconsciousness. I'm David Rothkopf. I'm your host, and this week, as every week, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in AI. This week from a slightly different perspective. As those of you who listen every week know, we've had technologists, we've had investors, we've had public officials, we've had academics, we've had Nobel Prize-winning economists, but we haven't had the broad viewpoint. And I wanted to get one from a journalist who has been tracking what's going on in AI broadly. We're very fortunate because we are doing some work with MIT Technology Review, and MIT Technology Review's editor, Mat Honan, was available to join us this week. And so welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you, David.
Good to see you. A lot of people in our audience follow what's going on in AI through places like Tech Review, and I have noticed there the percentage of AI-oriented stories increasing on a regular basis. I think you probably feel as an editor you could run several magazines off of the number of AI stories that come through. But I think we're at a very interesting moment. And we're at one where there seem to be different groups framing the moment differently, often in their self-interest. So I saw you did a review of a couple books on OpenAI, including one by our mutual friend and colleague, Karen Howe. In that review, which was a couple weeks ago, I encourage people to go read it. I think it was the end of May at your site. It talked about the trade-offs that are involved and how groups like OpenAI, people like Sam Altman, have been evangelists, and they've been selling an idea and an image, and they've been playing down the disruptions, the costs, the potential impact on things like income equality or job distribution, or even things like national power. Karen's book, which I think is very good, deals with this, and we'll have Karen on soon. But I was wondering, from your perspective right now, how do you see this debate evolving? How do you see the sides shaping up?
There are several ongoing, I feel like, debates about AI right now. I think you're referring to one that's I think you could think of it as sort of the extraction debate, and it's about the extraction of resources such as resources such as critical minerals, but also resources such as intellectual property. Things that are, Karen gets in her book a lot, things that are taken without asking, almost, and to build these language models and have them, and we're really talking about LLMs here in terms of AI in this debate. Things that are taken to make language models perform well, often without permission, often without without making sure that it's beneficial for the people everywhere, not just a small cluster of those in California. I think there's also other debates. There's a something that's really exploded on the internet in the last couple of days has been what I think of as almost a false choice, which is AI is going to do everything or AI is completely useless. There's that debate that's happening, and I think there was a New York Times Magazine issue that just came out. Some of the pieces just came out yesterday on AI that I think really inflamed that on the internet this week. And then there's I think there's yet another debate, which is and we can get into all of these to some extent about has AI plateaued? Have language models plateaued? For example, there was this Apple paper that came out recently that poured some cold water, or tried to pour some cold water on on reasoning models and their ability to actually reason or solve problems. And then there's subsequently been people taking issue with that, saying, "Oh, well, the math problems are unsolvable." But I think this extraction thing that you're talking about is one of them is the most interesting because it's the one that affects the most people right now. We've had and tell me if you want me to stop here and go back.
Keep going. Keep going.
We had this series on AI and energy a month ago. We published in May, and one of the things that we got into in it is the big AI companies, OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, or Meta, what have you. They all have these huge energy demands to power their language models. And they've all been, looking for sources for energy and talking about building out the grid and talking about, bringing back nuclear and like some of these ideas sound great, right? Like I think, personally, I'm someone who's a proponent of nuclear power. I think it's an energy source that we shied away from and probably shouldn't have. But those plants aren't going to come online for 10 years. What is going to come online in the meantime are natural gas plants. And so when these AI companies are looking for more energy, the things that's going to fill that in the short term is going to be natural gas. That's going to be something that, those plants will be around for 30 years. The ratepayers in Nevada or in Virginia, where a lot of these are being built out, are going to be on the hook for these for a long time. And it's being done without a whole lot of public discussion. That's the same thing that Karen really gets into a lot in her book. She talks about things that are happening in Chile, or the ways that, these workers around the world who are doing data labeling and essentially building the AI, and lands on this interesting note, I think, about ways that in some places, she has an example that I highlighted in my review, but I thought was a powerful one in New Zealand, where there's basically a community-driven language model. It's a small language model. It's not extractive. It's supported by the community. And I do think that this debate about who owns what that builds these language models, whose resources go into them, is expanding right now beyond just the intellectual property debate about extraction, which is where it's been. We've been talking for a long time now about the training data that fed these models, the intellectual property of however many authors that's gone into these, that's gone into training these models, the artists' works that have gone into training these models. And now I feel like that discussion is moving past just that, and it is moving into one more about, the wider use of resources by them. There have been stories in a number of publications, not just ours, about these. I do think that's where some of the debate is moving.
Well, typically debates like this are supposed to be solved in advanced or modern societies by government. And the debate about the arrival of the Industrial Revolution took about 150 years to be resolved by different governments. And in the United States, of course, there were big countervailing forces. You had the industrial North, the agricultural South, two different models battling each other, led to a civil war. this revolution is arguably as consequential as the Industrial Revolution. But what's interesting to me is that, although you're right, there are some groups that are emerging that are kind of Orwellian, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, all AI is bad, and so forth. But right in Washington, from where I'm sitting right now, we have a government, and the attitude of the government, which has a lot of AI people in and around it, is kind of like, let's have at it. Let's AI do what it's going to do. Let's not regulate it. Let's not worry about the various extractive issues, whether it's the intellectual property of writers whose work is used in LM or content creators whose work is used in LM. But also let's not worry about the environmental consequences of big data centers, and let's not worry about the potential labor market disruptions. In fact, in the current bill that exists before the Congress, there's this provision: states shall make no regulations pertaining to AI for the next 10 years. The other states have responded differently. You talk about New Zealand. The Europeans have responded differently. Chinese differently in yet another way. Yeah. But I'm wondering what do you think the consequences are of the U.S. being in the mode that it's in right now, which is kind of like, have at it, guys. We're just gonna pull away any hurdles you might face.
I mean, I've been asking people. I asked someone about this in industry yesterday, and it's interesting to me that I've heard from a number of people who work in AI that they would like some frameworks in place. The reason that we have them from the states is that we haven't seen that much from the federal government. We have, Biden's AI Act, but we don't really have very much in terms of actual legislation. And I do hear, and I don't think that it's, I don't think that these are crocodile tears, or that they're not genuine. I do hear from people, some of it is, working in AI, that they would like to have some sort of regulatory frameworks. It helps them know how they're going to operate. And, for the big incumbents, it gives them a market advantage because they're able to deal with it and craft that stuff. But my view on the, are we just going to have the AI industry go crazy, just not let the states make any laws, just let it rip? I do think that a patchwork of state laws is probably not a great thing, but I also think that this is an important enough industry that we need, if you're not going to have, legislation at the state level, and I think the states should be able to do some types of legislation, that the federal government has got to step in the lead, and that's definitely not happening. Right now, the federal government is all about let it rip, and not just on AI, obviously. And I think the assumption, I assume that their assumption is that by completely stripping away all regulation, we'll be able to better compete with China, et cetera, but probably mostly China. And the interesting thing is that China has a number of restrictions on AI usage, and my view is that it would be better for us to have the federal government maybe taking, as it often does, taking cues from the states, and then using that to craft a policy that everyone knows what their knows what the rules are, knows what the playing field looks like, and can move forward. I'm not an AI doomer by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think that it's going to take over the energy grid and kill us all, kind of stuff. But it's going to have a profound effect on employment. You're already starting to see evidence of that, and I think that there's a role for the federal government to play. Whether they should get out ahead of themselves is a separate question. But the idea of just we're going to sit back and see what happens, just that surprises me.
Yeah, well, as it happens, as these things evolve, the biggest player that creates the biggest hurdles will set the speed of the process, right? So if the Europeans say you can't do X or Y, or we're going to treat privacy in the following way, global scalability is impeded by that. If the Chinese say this, or if California says it, it has an impact, and so can act as a kind of a control or a guardrail. But let's go to this other issue that you brought up, this Apple paper, because I've seen a lot of controversy about that, and debates about some people embracing it. More people that I've seen have taken issue with it. How would you frame it? What do you think its consequences are?
I mean, one of the ways that I saw it framed was that what the paper found essentially is that and I should say I'm characterizing it here, I hope I'm not mischaracterizing it, but the paper, the big thing that people took away from the paper was that it found that reasoning models could essentially, I'm trying to remember the exact phrase you use, hit a point where they just fall off a cliff, where I think it's called the accountability cliff, something like that. I'm not going to get it right here, but and that these reasoning models, as they got like past a certain point, were no longer able to actually come up with correct answers, and in fact, in some cases, just a regular LLM versus a reasoning model would do a better job. The reasoning model, the sort of show your work reasoning model, has really exploded in 2025. It's the way that AI companies tend to. They're everybody sort of moves towards the same thing, and so now you go and you put an input in, and you may see it pretending to thinking through the problem. I say pretending to think because I don't like to really give AI agency, and it is sort of figuring out these questions. It's asking additional questions to the ones that you put in the prompt. And what the Apple paper said effectively was like, this doesn't work. Or it works up to a point. And then other people have critiqued it, saying that some of the math problems they set up, there were no answers to. It was impossible. It's not a debate that frankly I've been following super closely. It's one that I've kind of checked in on. But I think if you've used, I think part of the reason it resonates is if you've used, reasoning models very much, you can sort of see this happen for yourself. You can see them, have problems. And I guess to me, the thing that's more interesting, I don't really have a dog in this, is that it does point out that we're that what we're doing here with these seems like it maybe is plateauing a little bit. I think that's something that you do hear a good bit. I think there's some credence to that. Have you found that your use of ChatGPT or Gemini has dramatically improved in the past, 8 months since a lot of these began dropping? I'm trying to remember when. I guess it hasn't been 8 months even. It's really been, time moves quickly. It's been 6 here. And I don't know. I personally am. I think I was, a little bit interested in the Apple paper because it personally it confirms some of my biases about the reasoning models, about whether or not they're able to perform as well as we sort of anticipated they were.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've talked about here is the quest for the thinking about artificial intelligence has been around for decades and decades. The intensive level of progress that we've seen in the past 10 years, or accelerated in the minds of people since ChatGPT and the end of 2022, is another level. But the interesting counterpoint to me of this cliff theory is one that we're also hearing a lot these days, and that is we're within 5 years, 3 years, a year, from ASI, from artificial superintelligence. And processors are getting bigger and faster and capable of doing more amazing things. And clearly people are going to keep trying to solve problems like the one you're talking about. How do you reckon because people fairly sane. Eric Schmidt, I saw a video clip the other day. There's some fairly responsible, sane observers on this who are like, well, we're just getting to the point where this is going to surpass human capabilities real soon. And we're all going to sit around feeling dumb.
I will confess being skeptical of that. I mean, I one of the things that I try to encourage our publication and our reporters, and editors, is to approach a lot of the topics that we cover with the attitude of curious skepticism, and I guess that's how I feel about superintelligence. I'm there, as you mentioned, there are a lot of smart, serious people who are all in on it. The Facebook deal with Scale AI, pending deal, Scale AI, which basically is a 14 point something billion deal to get a 49% stake of the company, and very importantly, its CEO to run superintelligence inside of Meta. Forgive me, I'm habituated to saying Facebook over many years, and even though it's been several years now, I still say it instead of Meta. But they're not spending that much money, in a data and talent acquisition if they didn't believe in it. And although certainly Meta has made some bets that don't seem like they've panned out, including becoming Meta in the metaverse. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know more than some of the folks on the inside of these companies who are seeing things that I haven't seen yet, that I don't have any way to gauge. But like I said, I was thinking about this honestly this morning. What is it about something like superintelligence, about AGI, these things that are almost, I wouldn't describe them as quite religious, but there's an element of belief to it that is appealing to so many very smart people. Why do we think that we're going to be able to build something that's going to surpass the intelligence of the builder? It's an interesting question. I don't have a good answer for it, David. I wish I did. I wish I could sort of definitively put a stake down. But I'm just going to remain curious about what happens and skeptical that it's actually going to arrive.
Well, you guys have a kind of special perch as you watch this happen. You write about it on a regular basis. You also convene people to talk about it, and I followed with some interest. You do MTech, what you call some of your conferences. There was in May an MTech conference in AI. People can go online and look at what the agenda was, and you guys have written about it somewhat. But wandering around, what were the things people were talking about in the hall?
Something that we've actually talked about a few times following that conference. Our senior editor for AI, Will Heaven, was the one who was really struck by this, and once when he brought it up, it was the experience that I had, was how flat-footed even very sophisticated people feel right now. The thing that I'm saying to you, superintelligence, I don't know. That comes down to a much more practical question for a lot of people, which is like, well, how can I incorporate this stuff into my business, into my life? Where do I start? A common thing that we heard was something along the lines of like, I really want to bring in some sort of AI into my business, but in order to do that, I have to convince the finance department that we're going to be able to achieve cost savings with it, but I don't know what it's going to do, and so I don't know how to calculate what those cost savings might be, and I don't really know where to start. Help. And I think that's a relatively common sentiment right now. Like and when people, are approaching this, I mean, there's certainly debate about its usefulness. But when people are approaching it, like nobody really knows. This goes back to your earlier point. What type of effect it might have in any individual business potentially. And when they're talking about cost savings, what they're often talking about is reducing headcount. And staff reductions, laying people off in order to let one of these things take their job. And what I was really struck by with our conference was that people who have been working in the industry for a long time have now often familiarized themselves, or I should say tech industry versus AI industry, for a long time have now used ChatGPT and Gemini and even more specialized tools to the point that they're wanting to bring them into their business, but unsure how to. I mean, there's some places where it's relatively clear, like we did hear from people, spoke to people who are using coding assistants who are, even fully vibe coding now. But if you are working in something that's not a software company per se, it can be harder to know where to start. And that was the big takeaway for me. And these sort of esoteric discussions that we can have about research papers come down to a really practical level for a lot of folks in ways that was grounding for me and made me think like sometimes maybe we should do a better job about sort of stepping back from the big picture stuff and get and get more involved in the day-to-day usefulness of this stuff or how it can be used.
Well, we've been doing this for a long time. We've been talking to people in this sector for a long time, before that, we've all lived through. We're at Wired, and we lived through all the sort of technology hoopla periods, and the lesson of all of them, I think, is we're better served by a little bit of humility, right? Because there are people who say, well, this will cause no disruption, or this will create a lot of jobs, and there are people who say it'll cost jobs. Nobody knows, and there is no general rule because some places it will and some places it won't. The same is true. There's a bunch of studies out right now saying, well, people who use AI a lot get stupider. Okay, that's kind of ridiculous, but there are studies and articles and so forth saying that. But knowing what we don't know seems to be super helpful. I do think the business applied business kind of questions are interesting because basically people know there's this tool that can take a lot of data and process it very quickly, and that can produce new correlations in scientific research, or can do the work that other people were doing, and so forth. How do I apply it? And of course, in business, the punchline of that is always, how do I make more money?
Yeah.
In fact, we were talking to Gigi Levy-Weitz, right, the Israeli entrepreneur, tech investor. And it was interesting when I said, well, what are you looking for? And his response was, well, we're looking for 3-person unicorns. And I was like, well, what's a 3-person unicorn? He said, well, it's a company with just 3 people, but it's using AI to do the work of lots and lots of people. And so it's going to grow, but it's going to have a completely different kind of a model. I guess as my last question here, I could come back and talk about a lot of things. Investors are looking at this differently. People who have to look 3, 4, 5 years out on this are looking at this differently. And I'm wondering what the vibe is you're getting from them.
I'm still getting boom vibes from investors on AI. On a lot of other things, there's a tremendous amount of concern right now. But the 3-person unicorn, I've also heard it expressed as the 1-person unicorn. Even who's going to be the first person who has $1 billion valuation for their business? It's just one person and AI. It's a good question. I investors that I talk to, and I try to both talk to investors regularly and also take what they tell me with a grain of salt, because they are fundamentally trying to promote their products, are still extremely optimistic that we're going to be able to, or that people writ large are going to be able to use all sorts of AI tools, specialized ones, build new tools to create enormous enormous amounts of wealth with very small teams. And that's I think you can take that a few steps farther and see that maybe that same type of thinking could be applied to existing businesses. And it's I think there are some concerns that we should have over that. David, I know we're running short on time here. Can I bring up one other thing that I thought was interesting that came out this week? Which is
Absolutely.
My former editor, actually, at Wired, he was my first editor at Wired, a guy named Rob Capps, wrote a story for the Times this week, looking at 22 new jobs that are going to be created by AI, and some of it was sort of a head scratcher to me, but some of it was very practical. And in fact, I even sent it to our publisher. I was like, hey, look at these couple of roles that he describes. These seem like some interesting things. He also brought up an idea that's very popular right now in AI circles, which is the role of taste, and that you're going to have humans who steer the taste, and the human value of taste is something that's going to be really hard for AI to mimic. I do think of it as a mimic. And to me, that's an that was his story was an optimistic one when we talk about the potential downsides. Rob went out and found some upsides and some places to be thinking about the future in ways that aren't a little gloomy.
That's cool. What are the jobs you think you need to add at Tech Review that came up in it?
Essentially, one's around steering AI around our corpus of editorial in ways that can benefit readers on sort of an individual basis, on being able to develop AI internally on our training it and then making it something external facing.
It's interesting because Nieman Lab comes out, it does these summaries of various reports. There was a Reuters report on where people get their news these days, and a big element in the Reuters report this week was AI, and part of it was it's disrupting models, right? As you guys and others must find, as we find, the whole theory of how you promote content on the internet has changed, because people used to go use a search engine. The search engine would lead them to a bunch of things. Now there's an AI at the top of the page that says, here's the answer to your question, and people aren't looking any further. And so it's causing potential problem. But there were also some suggestions in this Nieman Lab study that some publications were using AI to write their headlines. And I'm just bringing that up to you. Here's an opportunity.
I mean, we I'll tell you that I'm already sort of doing that. I mean, I've always found, my previous role before Tech Review, I was working at BuzzFeed News. We had a tool in our CMS for every story we would write 3 headlines, and it would show variations of those headlines to 1,000 people. Whichever one won became the canonical headline. Whichever one got the most clicks became the canonical headline. And it sharpened the way that I thought about headlines, but it never stopped being tedious. And I still find like headline writing to be one of those things that's it's like a dark art. And the only way that I know how to do it is to come up with a bunch of them and then try and see, okay, well, this one wins. But coming up with a bunch of them, it can take you a long time. And so what I routinely do now is describe the story and or drop some of the text into ChatGPT and ask it to give me a list of 20 headlines. And, I don't always use one of the 20. I often typically don't even use one of the 20 word for word, but it's a great way to think, create, or to boost my creativity, I find. And, I use it all the time as a productivity hack.
Well, I write a lot for other publications, and I've talked to those publications recently. And of course, in my line of work, like writing for, the New Republic, I just a piece for Daily Beast and so forth. And I talk to those editors, and they say, "Oh, headline writing is simple these days. You have to put the word Trump in every headline."
Right. That works too.
Yeah, that drives the story. Anyway, look, Matt, I'm really glad that you could join us. I'm really glad that we could get this perspective from you. I hope you will come back. I really enjoy reading what you're doing. I encourage everybody to do it, and I enjoy following the events and so forth that you're doing, and working with you guys on the few events we're doing. Thank you, and hopefully you'll come back. And everybody, we say the same to you here at Siliconsciousness. We've been doing this for a couple of years now, almost, and growing and growing and growing. And we hope you will continue to come with us. And if you like it, go to the dsrnetwork.com, click on membership, become a member, help support what we're doing. Until the next time, not only thanks to Matt, thanks to all of you, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, David.